From a Chinese rocket losing control immediately after launch and crashing into a nearby village, to the failed landing of the SpaceX Starship and a catastrophic 1950s explosion on the launch pad, here are 5 rocket launches that went horribly wrong. China is a country you don't hear much about when it comes to space travel, but that doesn't mean they aren't active in this industry. Back on February 15th of 1996, the country was set to launch a satellite from the Xichang Satellite Launch Center. Interestingly, the satellite they were launching was built by an American company, but that's not that important. Video shot by the government shows the moment the rocket took off, and almost immediately it becomes clear there is something seriously wrong. The rocket was heading in the wrong direction and soon ended up crashing back to Earth. The rocket ended up smashing into a nearby village, where it is said that 6 people lost their lives. However, estimates from Western nations claim the number is likely much higher and was being covered up by the Chinese government. The investigation that took place determined that there was a failure within the rocket's guidance system. The investigation forced the Long March rocket program to greatly improve its reliability. The program did not experience another failure until 2011. However, the parties involved with the disaster did not get out of it unscathed. The US government conducted its own investigation, which found that information from the report had been given illegally to China. Space Systems Laurel had to pay $20 million to settle charges of violating export controls. It's a space disaster you don't often hear much about, but definitely one of the most significant in recent memory. Elon Musk is a person we all likely know plenty about. He's an innovator and entrepreneur and one of the most well-known of our time. When founding SpaceX, Musk wanted to come up with a way to bring down the costs. Prior to him trying to solve this problem, rockets would simply fall back down to Earth and were usually destroyed on impact. Musk decided this method was not as practical, so he and his team developed a way for the boosters to not only guide themselves back down to Earth, but to be able to land standing upright. On January 17th of 2016, a Falcon 9 rocket carrying the Jason 3 satellite launched from California. It was a picture-perfect launch with the stages separating as planned. The only thing left was for the rocket to land on the barge in the ocean. Cameras were rolling as the engine performed its self-correcting maneuvers and lined up with the platform for its landing. The rocket gently set itself down and the engines cut off, but they weren't in the clear just yet. Immediately after touchdown, the landing arms opened to support the device. Unfortunately, one of the arms didn't lock into place, and the weight of the rocket was too much for the other 2 to support on their own. This caused the rocket to fall over and explode. SpaceX has gone on to have many successful landings since this, and because nobody was on the barge at the time, there were no injuries of any kind. Back in October of 2014, NASA was planning to launch one of its Antares rockets with the simple goal of delivering goods to the International Space Station. The rocket was unmanned, and the mission was one that had been done many times before. It should have been a routine launch, but things quickly spiraled out of control.
1. And we have liftoff of Antares with the Orbit 3 mission delivering Cygnus on its 3rd CRS mission to the ISS. Got main engines at 108%.
Avionics power nominal.
Immediately following this mishap, an investigation launched, and around a year later, the report came out. Within the rocket's liquid oxygen turbopump inside one of those two AJ-26 engines, an explosion occurred. This blast caused the rocket to lose thrust and come smashing into Earth. The explosion occurred because both stationary and rotating parts within the turbopump came into contact with one another. The excessive amount of friction that was generated led to the ensuing fire. Interestingly, the report wasn't able to determine what caused the issue with the turbopump in the first place. Investigators narrowed it down to 3 potential issues. First, it's possible the explosion occurred as a result of inadequate design robustness of the engine itself, which made it more susceptible to oxygen fires. But it's also possible debris such as titanium or silica got into the engine. Finally, there could have been a manufacturing defect within the engine. While investigators couldn't say for sure, luckily nobody was harmed in this disaster. Now, if you know anything about Elon Musk, then you know his ultimate goal is to get humans to Mars. It's a big idea, but one he and his team are working diligently to accomplish. In order to do so, a massive rocket had to be developed that was capable of making the long journey, and in typical SpaceX fashion, able to land back on Earth. This is how the Starship came to be. December 2020, SpaceX conducted its high-altitude test flight of Starship SN8. At first, everything was going great. The 12-story tall rocket reached an altitude of about 12.5 kilometers before the engines were turned off and the landing portion of the test commenced. The rocket fell back down to Earth before the engines turned back on to adjust it in position to land. Unfortunately, some calculations were slightly off, and the rocket came in a bit too fast. To most people, this crash would be a huge disappointment. But to the team at SpaceX, this was an excellent learning opportunity to help improve future versions of the Starship. To Elon, this test was a huge success, even going as far to say that he expected the rocket to crash. To him, this was nothing more than another step in the right direction, and since then, they have gone on to complete many successful landings. Back in the 1950s, the space race was well underway. The world witnessed several successful Soviet launches with Sputnik 1 and 2, forcing the United States to ramp up their launch efforts. So, they designed the Vanguard TV3, their first attempt to get a satellite into orbit. The TV3 was built to test the launch capabilities of the 3-stage Vanguard rocket. It was also supposed to obtain geodetic measurements through the orbit's analysis. The launch took place on December 6th of 1957. Unfortunately, just 2 seconds after liftoff, the rocket began to lose thrust. Immediately after losing thrust, the rocket crashed back into the launch pad, exploding in a massive fireball. The rocket was completely destroyed, and the launch pad itself suffered extensive damage. An investigation ensued, but they could not determine the precise cause of the accident. It is believed that the fuel system malfunctioned in some way. After the incident, the satellite was too badly damaged to be salvaged. However, it went on to be displayed in the National Air and Space Museum in the Smithsonian. Luckily, nobody was seriously injured in this crash, and the country went on to complete many successful launches afterwards. If you enjoyed this video and want to see another just like it, then be sure to click the link on screen now. With that, thank you all for watching, and be sure to tune in next time.